The air buzzed with flies. The smell of sweat and hay stuck to the hot day. There she was, a young woman, about 23 years old, tied to a wooden post in an old horse barn near San Angelo, Texas. The ropes around her wrists were so tight they cut her skin. Blood ran down her arms in the burning sun. One eye was swollen shut. Her face was red from being hit. Her white dress was torn at the shoulder and hip. She had been hurt badly and left there like an animal. It was summer in Texas, 1890. The heat was cruel. Dust blew through the broken boards of the barn, covering her torn dress and sticking to the sweat on her bruised skin. She shook, not just from pain, but from deep fear. The kind that makes your chest feel heavy. You could tell she had tried to fight. The rope burns on her arms showed it. Her knees were scraped from trying to stand. But now she hung there, breathing slow and shallow. Her eyes stared at the door like she was hoping someone would come save her. Men in the West had seen bad things, hangings, cattle thieves, shootings in saloons. But this was different. This was seeing an innocent person hurt by greed and power. It was a sight that would break any man's heart, especially one who had a daughter or loved a woman. Who could do this? And why? The question hung in the quiet air. Into this silence stepped Samuel Ross. A rancher of 51 years, carrying the weight of a life hardened by loss and solitude. He was no stranger to pain. But what he saw inside that stable froze him in place. The sun seemed to dim. The world seemed to narrow to one sight. A girl broken but still alive. Her eyes wet with tears she refused to shed. But cutting those ropes was only the beginning. The real danger was waiting at his own ranch. Samuel did what any man with a heart still beating would do. He pulled his knife, sliced through the ropes, and caught her before she crumpled into the dirt. Her body was weak, trembling like a newborn animal, her skin hot from the relentless Texas sun. He carried her out of that stable, laid her carefully across his horse, and set off for his ranch. With every hoof beat, Samuel felt the weight of something heavier than the girl in his arms. He was in trouble, and he knew it. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned the color of burning coals. Samuel brought her inside his small cabin, the smell of wood smoke and leather wrapping around them. He lowered her into a chair and filled a cup with water from the pump outside. She drank like a woman starved, each sip slow, her lips trembling against the tin. Only then did she finally find her voice. She told him her name was Rose Bennett. She told him she was the daughter of a rancher up in Parker County. Her father owned land that stretched wide and green. Land that had caught the eye of a man named Morrison. Morrison was a man of wealth and temper. The sort who believed money bought everything. Rose's father told him no. And Morrison, not used to hearing that word, sent his men to make the answer change. They had taken Rose, tied her, beaten her, and left her to rot. She was not the end goal. She was leverage, a pawn in a bigger game to crush her father's will and seize his land. Samuel sat silent, listening, his jaw hard as stone. He had known men like Morrison all his life, men who built empires on fear, who twisted the law to their liking. But he also knew this land, this Texas dirt, and he knew when it was worth standing your ground. The thought of Rose's father forced to his knees, and Rose used as bait, turned his stomach. Rose's eyes met his across the cabin table. They were tired eyes, bruised and swollen, but inside them was a spark. She had endured pain no one her age should ever face. Yet she was not broken. Samuel felt the air shift by saving her. He had stepped into a storm bigger than his own ranch, and there would be no easy way back. And as the lamps burned low in that cabin, the sound of footsteps outside told Samuel that the storm was already on his doorstep. The night was quiet, too quiet for Texas. Samuel knew his land. He knew the sound of coyotes yipping, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the windmill. But what he heard now was different. Slow boots on dirt. Someone outside his cabin. His hand moved to the old Colt resting on the table. The door creaked open and there he was. Jake Murphy, a man with a crooked grin and eyes that carried no shame. He was one of Morrison's men, the kind who did not ask questions, only swung fists and tied knots. Rose gasped when she saw him, Her whole body stiffened like the ropes had found her again. Jake leaned against the doorway, too casual for a man caught in another man's home. He told Samuel he had come for the girl. He said it plain like she was cattle to be herded back. Samuel stood, his jaw set, the Colt in his hand steady. There was a pause, the kind that feels like thunder building on the horizon. Then Rose broke it. Her voice was raw but strong. She shouted, warning Samuel just as Jake lunged forward. That one shout gave Samuel the edge. The rancher slammed Jake against the wall. Years of hard work in the fields turning into raw power. Jake fought, but Samuel pinned him down, and the fight drained out of him like water through dry sand. When Samuel searched him, a packet of bills fell to the floor. Fresh money stamped with the mark of the Parker County Bank. Bills known to come from Morrison's accounts. It was proof, the kind you did not need a judge to read. Rose's face went pale. She remembered one of the men jeering when she was tied, saying Morrison would finally get what he wanted. Now the pieces fit. Samuel stared down at Jake, the man squirming like a snake caught under a boot. The truth was clear. Rose had been right. She was just a pawn in a land grab driven by greed. Samuel felt that old anger in his chest. He had lived long and seen men broken by power. But this was different. This was his ranch, his land, his home, now tied to this young woman's fate. Dawn came slow, spreading light across the Texas plains. Samuel had not slept. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, watching where the land met the sky. Rose slept in the chair by the fire, her face pale but her spirit strong. The night had brought no peace, only the heavy truth that more trouble was coming. Then he heard it, horse hooves. Not one horse, but several, the sound rolling like far-off thunder. Samuel stood and looked out. 3 riders came toward the ranch, getting bigger with each step of their horses. Each one carried himself like he knew people feared him. Rose woke when Samuel loaded his gun. She whispered his name, her voice tight. But words were not needed. Both knew this moment was coming. Morrison had sent more men to finish what Jake could not do. The riders got off their horses in a cloud of dust. They carried torches and cans of oil, the kind of tools that could turn a ranch to ashes in minutes. One of them yelled for Samuel to come out and give them the girl. It was not a request, it was a threat. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, his shadow long in the morning sun. He called back, his voice low but sharp, telling them this ranch was not theirs to take. The standoff went on, the kind of quiet that makes your heart pound. Then everything exploded. A torch flew through the air, landing on a pile of hay. Rose, without thinking, grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on the flames. At the same time, Samuel pulled the trigger. The first rider fell, his torch hitting the ground. The second rushed forward with his gun out, but Samuel turned and fired again. The third hid behind cover, but Rose threw a wooden beam at his horse. The horse reared up and threw its rider to the dirt. The fight ended as fast as it started. Dust hung in the air. The smell of gunpowder was sharp and bitter. 2 men lay hurt. One crawled away into the brush, swearing he would get them back. Samuel stood on the porch breathing hard, the rifle still warm. Rose looked at him, her chest moving fast, her eyes wide not with fear, but with something deeper. While the gun smoke still hung in the air, word of the fight was already racing back to town, straight to the man who started it all. By the time Samuel brought Jake Murphy and the hurt men to town, word was spreading like wildfire. People gathered in the street with sharp eyes and low voices. When the sheriff saw the money marked with Morrison's bank seal, and heard Jake curse his master's name in anger, the last wall of silence broke. People who had stayed quiet for years now spoke up. A store owner stepped forward and told how Morrison had hurt him with unfair debts. A widow shouted how Morrison's men had forced her off her land. The dam had broken. By noon, the whole town was no longer afraid. They walked together to Morrison's big house on the hill. He tried to lock the doors and hide behind hired guns, but fear is weak when truth comes out. Samuel stood with Rose at the edge of the crowd, watching as people who once kept their heads down now stood tall. Morrison was pulled down his own steps, his fine coat torn, his face white. He yelled for order and respect, but no one listened anymore. In the West, sometimes justice came with a judge's hammer, but more often it came from ordinary men and women who had had enough. That day, Morrison lost everything: his power, his pride, and the fear he had ruled with. Only after the dust settled did Thomas Bennet arrive with his wagon. His face showed sleepless nights, but his eyes lit up when he saw Rose. She ran into his arms, and seeing father and daughter together made even the hardest rancher wipe away tears. Thomas shook Samuel's hand, gripping it tight, a wordless thanks between two men who knew sacrifice. Then Rose got on the wagon. She turned, her eyes staying on Samuel. They were soft, filled with more than just thanks. Samuel touched his hat with a small smile. He said nothing, but the quiet in that moment felt heavier than words. Was it goodbye? Or the start of something left unsaid? Maybe the lesson here is that justice does not come from wealth, but from courage. That love does not always shout. Sometimes it waits in silence. If you were Samuel, would you have spoken your heart before that wagon rolled away? The end.